And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter in the way they matter as this new week begins with a bang. And thank God it wasn't a louder bang in the New York City terrorist attack by two of millions of Islamists we decided to let into this country. Your host, Daniel Horowitz, back here today to discuss the issue that actually does matter. And, we could talk about the war in Iran. We'll delve into that, the progress of it later this week. But the bigger war is here at home. The bigger war is embodied in the fact, and I'm going to put up the graphic here for those that are viewing our show on YouTube at Horowitz Show, Muslim immigration. We barely had it before the 90s. Then we had a little bit. And then after 2000, we went from a little bit more than a million Muslims to 4.5 million 20 years later. And frankly, 5 years later, 6 years after that census was taken, it's probably closer to a total of 5 million in this country. So we had these two jihadis who threw two IEDs into a crowd. They have some more bombs that the NYPD discovered. You have a Muslim taken off of a plane. Very traumatic experience for people on this flight from Nashville to Fort Lauderdale, Southwest flight, where for this flight 2094, where this guy was threatening to blow up the place with a bomb. And then, now you have this bomb scare in another bomb scare in New York City and one at the Kansas City airport. And this, of course, follows last weekend where we had the Austin terrorist attack where another immigrant we let in from the Islamic world shot up a bar in Austin. So I guess we should be thankful that at least there's been no fatalities through all this. But the point is, we don't have to live this way. The Constitution is not a suicide pact, even if this was constitutional. But the reality is, there is no constitutional right to build mosques in every corner, to have endless immigration, and in the mosques, celebrate Khomeini, chant death to America. That is not a religion. Moreover, and here's the important thing, every single major Islamic institution in America is not funded by just some sort of pious Muslim organization, NGO. It is all related to Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, and their various tentacles and decentralized organizations. We either shut it down or we have no country. It's really that simple. So I want to get into this and more later today. We're going to have Krista Schild from the RAIR Foundation back to discuss what's going on with Sharia in America and Texas in particular. We talked about Texas a lot last week. A lot of people are looking at Mandami and saying, oh my gosh, New York City has been conquered. You have Muslims everywhere there. You have these two jihadis. You have the NYPD standing down as this guy's throwing IED in front of them and they don't even shoot him. You have the mayor who is an Islamic nutcase, obviously supporting these guys. But the reality is we have this problem pretty much in all 50 states, but especially in big states like Texas and Florida. There's hundreds of thousands of these people, and they're building mosques and schools and banks and NGOs all over these states, colonizing, subverting, infiltrating every fabric of our neighborhoods, our society, our economy. This is where the battle is. And frankly, if the president wants to galvanize people for the midterms, I want to make something very clear. Because Republicans are gathering in Florida for their annual House GOP retreat, and Trump's going to speak there. And he's basically making a push for the SAVE Act. Now, the SAVE Act is small potatoes. I know some people are saying, well, it's important because if they can't do that, they can't do anything. But you know what is that? So non-citizens, you have to show proof of citizenship to vote. Do you want to know something funny? Or not funny, it's kind of sad. Amir Balat and Ibrahim Qayyumi, who are the two guys caught throwing these IEDs into a crowd of, protesters. So their parents came from Turkey. One was from Turkey and one was from Afghanistan. They naturalized at various periods of time over the last 15 years. But these punks who are like 18, 19 years old, they were born in America. They were born in America around 2006, 2007. After 9/11, we let them in. They were born here. Okay? They could vote legally. Are there non-citizens voting? Yes. But for the most part, the major issue and transformation of America is bringing in Islam, bringing in the third world in the millions, and then 10, 15 years later, they become citizens. So again, that's not the issue. You want to galvanize people saying we're going to shut down all Islamic immigration, not just some temporary pauses from certain countries, but shut it down completely, codify it into law, and then not just declare a couple of branches that are irrelevant of the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist groups, but the most important branches, aka the ones in America, terrorist groups, and then that will open up authorities to shut down this entire empire that they've built here. We either do that or we do not survive as a civilization. It's that simple. I don't want to hear about, small ball like the SAVE Act. I mean, I'm all for it. But if that's the best we can do, forget it. And again, I want to bring back this graphic again. It's scary thinking back to when I had a little bit less gray hair. I was on Sean Hannity's show debating this Mexican guy about 12 years ago, talking about Islamic immigration. It's like doubled since then. And it was 11 years ago that Trump came down the escalator. We're about, March? So about 2 months shy of the 11th anniversary of Trump saying we need to shut down Islamic immigration until we know what the hell is going on. He was president the first term. And mind you, they did not have a narrow majority. They had a stronger majority for those first 2 years. And nothing was done. Then we got Biden. So it's the same thing here if he does a little bit more. But then Democrats, we already know, are going to come back very, very strong, have a huge mandate. If you don't codify into law, this moratorium, but most importantly, we need to give authority to red states to deal with this and to get rid of judicial supremacism. That's what it is, or at least for immigration law, defunding deportation cases. Right now, he can't even remove like a guy on a visa who's not even a green card holder promoting Hamas on college campuses, much less dealing with those already naturalized or even born here that are, pushing jihad. We're way behind the 8 ball here. We talked last week about low expectations, but I mean, if this is the one thing we're going to do, and this is part of the problem with that stupid budget reconciliation bill, that one bill, he had so much political capital last year. We spent it on some random assortment of tax provisions when it could have been on saving civilization, permanent immigration reform, and particularly in the red states, so that even when Democrats come in, the states could at least say, look, New York's going to be an Islamic empire, but at least we're not going to do this in Texas and Florida and Alabama and Oklahoma. But we're doing it all in all those states. And particularly now with the DHS funding bill and obviously with TSA not getting paid for a few weeks, you're seeing huge lines in every airport. So this is going to become a big pressure point. Now is the time for the president to say, Homeland security begins by not letting in people who hate us. And you put that in the bill. You put a sanctuary city provision in the bill. You put a sanctuary judge provision in the bill that there is no right to come here and litigate your way into status. Just over the weekend, the DC Court of Appeals, second most powerful court in America, ruled that another 350,000 Haitians get to remain in the country on TPS after Congress stripped the courts of jurisdictions, and at least 2 other Supreme Court rulings said, of course, the president could do it, but they come back in a slightly different case. We can't keep doing this. And again, I could excuse the low expectations federally if in the red states we went pedal to the metal. But what are we doing in states like Texas? We talked about that last week. Nothing. Sharia is taking over. Green energy is taking over. Data centers are taking over. There's nothing conservative about these states. So what is our plan other than tweeting? This is what I don't understand. Makes absolutely no sense. But first, I want to get to our sponsor for today. I'd like to introduce you to Gabby Stout. She's a high school junior in North Carolina, was inspired by Charlie Kirk, and wanted to paint some sort of legacy painting, a message on her school's Spirit Rock. But after school officials gave Gabby permission, they then reversed it because they got a bunch of flack. And then they accused her of vandalism for, writing messages that they allow for transgenderism and all sorts of anti-God stuff. Gabby was punished for standing up for biblical values. ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, is defending her right in court. They are one of the few organizations actually defending our heritage and godly rights that are under assault by, again, the godless pagans and communists and Islamists. Will you take a moment to write her a quick note of encouragement? You could support ADF and Gabby by going to joinadf.com/blaze and or texting Blaze, BLAZE, to 83848 to send Gabby an encouraging note or Bible verse and thank her for standing up for our freedoms. Go to joinadf.com/blaze. That's joinadf.com/blaze or text 83848 to Blaze. So anyway, folks, I just want to make it very clear. A lot of people are saying this was an ISIS-inspired terrorism. I think even NYPD is saying that. Again, these two people, Balat and Kayumi, 18, 19-year-olds, and they weren't even from New York. They were from Bucks County. A lot of people are showing one of the houses that one of them lived in was a $1.7 million house. This is not about ISIS. It's Islam, okay? It's not any one terrorist group. The problem is not some sort of jihadist in Raqqa or Damascus that has an ISIS flag shouting death to America. The problem is your local imam in Bucks County. It could be in Dallas. It could be in Red America in Lubbock, Texas. Not just New York City, shouting similar things inside the mosques that you don't hear about, but it's being done every day. The problem is here at home. It's an immigration problem. It's a subversion problem. It's allowing CAIR and the Muslim Brotherhood to continue to operate. And even these Republicans that go ahead and claim that they're going to ban them, and then they do nothing to enforce it. So they just let out the air from the balloon, the pressure, and then it keeps going on. So officers have now located third suspicious device in the car thought to belong to one of the two suspects taken into custody. So we have a total of 3 suspicious devices that have been uncovered. Meanwhile, the head, I don't know who runs it, but FDNY, the pride of New York's fire department, they put a prayer rug in front of the memorial plaque for the firefighters, the 450 or so who were killed on 9/11, in observance of Ramadan, which is now everywhere in our society, schools, government agencies. I mean, that's something that we need to kick out of all red states. So this is what we're doing. It's like putting a Nazi symbol on the graves of the Normandy heroes. I mean, this is just unbelievable what's happening everywhere. And again, I could forgive this if it happened only in New York City. But this is now a 50-state problem, and red states aren't dealing with it. And again, this is why an immigration moratorium and a moratorium on judicial cases over immigration is 10 times more important than the SAVE Act. With lines at the airports now, with the DHS funding bill as the mechanism, now is the time to do it. That is what you could rally. You want to rally people because right now, again, Republicans are going to get slaughtered no matter what. The question is, do they lose red states to Democrats? Because at this pace, with them being worse than Democrats on data centers and the economy, they'll lose a bunch of red states. It's that bad. So this is the only thing that could ward that off. And then we need to start with denaturalizing, because again, a naturalized citizen is not the same as a natural born citizen. Not the same. Because you have to swear an oath to abjure all allegiance to foreign sovereigns. Well, if they clearly are espousing that allegiance and they're here naturalized, they should be denaturalized. You know, that's obvious. So that is with the Islamic stuff. Just wanted to say just one quick thing on the war. Look, there's a lot of questions. What is our strategy? You know, we have depleted stockpiles of weapons, thanks in part to Trump actually helping out Joe Biden, if you remember 2 years ago, and getting Mike Johnson when the House Republicans had zero support for Ukraine, getting him to give another 100 billion, and it's done us nothing. At least this hardware is going to destroying Iran. I just want to say one point. Oil prices is not an argument against the war. You either support it or you don't. And I think we need clarity as to what the president is trying to do, and that we'll see what the ROI is. But right now, we're always subject to, for decades, to Iran spiking oil prices because they control the freaking Straits of Hormuz. If we have a plan to wrest it from them, then it's like doing surgery. So temporarily, that area hurts even more from the surgery, but you solve the problem. So in the long run, it will be better for oil. If we don't, then it's a problem in its own right anyway. But I'm just saying the fact that temporarily you have a spike in oil prices is not, obviously they're going to try to put pressure on him, but that should not be a reason for Trump to cave. He just needs to get the job done at this point. It is what it is, and he needs to get the job done. So we'll talk about the war more as it unfolds. But again, none of this is worthwhile. Like, while I generally support finally tackling Iran before the next Democrat president, but it's meaningless if the president doesn't tackle the Islamist problem at home, because that, of course, is the biggest problem. We have strategic interests, we have shipping lanes that need to be dealt with, but obviously, we have our neighborhoods that are being transformed overnight by Islam, and we cannot allow that to continue. But again, this is not part of the Republican effort at all at this retreat and this get together to deal with. Andy Ogles from Tennessee, he has brought this up at the conference. That Islam is incompatible with Western civilization, as we well know. But what we've learned is, again, there is an unlimited supply of people like Ballat and Kuyumi. There is an unlimited supply of people in this country that were born in this country, probably don't know any other country, although maybe they traveled back to these hellholes. I don't know. One was Afghan, one was Turkish. By the way, Turkey is not on the list of, I don't think it's on Trump's list. I can double check that. We have a tremendous amount of immigration from Turkey and student visas, all sorts of things. That's another thing with Trump. Like, I could support him with Iran, but it's worthless if he's not consistent. If he's going to kiss up to Qatar, kiss up to Erdogan in Turkey, it just muddles it. You have to be consistent in your policies. But the point is, this is obviously not about wealth. We see these people are wealthy. A lot of these guys are wealthy. Bin Laden and his clan were extremely wealthy. It's not about ISIS or any one terror group. It's not about a particular strain of Islam. The only strain of Islam we have that funds the entirety of the infrastructure, the religious, educational, nonprofit Islam, is hooked in with this, and they believe in this. So if there's some sort of construct of Islam that's just, here off to the side and minding its own business that we don't know about, that's fine. But that is not what is taking place today. And that is not a religion. Meaning, if I let's say I start a religion and I call it a religion, the Huba Luba religion, and my religion is to kill people. So is that protected, that you have to have that in the country? Obviously, there's no right to immigration. That's 100%. But even those already here, I mean, this is something that we need to discuss. But what I'm saying is, you don't even have to discuss Constitution not being a suicide pact to make the case that you can't be at war with Iran, for example, and then have mosques that are promoting Iran. That's treason. We never tolerated that in American history. Okay. You had Quakers or whatever that just didn't want to participate in a war and didn't want to be conscripted, but they weren't subverting the country and rooting for the other side. We have to deal with this issue. There's one more thing I just want to say before we go on to our guest segment. So, what is the problem with the GOP? What has been the problem? That every time we need to run a marathon, that every time we need to run away from something that is terrible and defeat it, we have the GOP doing the exact opposite, giving aid and comfort to the enemy. So now we have this new right that's supposed to be based, led by Tucker Carlson and people like that. So Islam is one of our biggest problems, could be our biggest problem to civilization. And yet his entire apparatus, his entire media organization, and entire ecosystem that he's created, and these are top people, him with Candace and Megyn Kelly, all these people, is to sanitize Islam and say that Jews are the problem. Now, I don't care what you think of Jews. I really don't. If you love them, neutral, don't like them. But if you're out there with misdirection that Jews are somehow the problem in the world and in the country, and defending Islam at a time when Islam is the biggest problem, you're not just, ineffective or a new right. You're more subversive than any iteration of the right or the GOP that we've had until now. But this is what we're dealing with at a time when we have such a vexing problem that what do you do after you let in 5 million of these people? There are endless, countless thousands of people that would do what Balat and Kayumi tried to do in New York City over the weekend. And there's endless hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who agree with it that we let in, and we need to deal with that. And yet you have a significant portion of the right's media apparatus now trying to convince a generation of, right-leaning Americans to focus on Jews all day. Which obviously in the context of this war, I don't just mean Iran, I'm just saying this whole civilization, Jihad, is giving aid and comfort to Islam. It's unbelievable. That's what I'm saying. Some people think, well, I agree with Tucker on some things. Maybe he's a little bit off. He's not a little bit off. This guy is a cancer. Utter cancer. But anyway, I want to get to our special guest here. I just first want to remind all of you to subscribe to the Blaze Unlimited. Okay, this is a special tier. If you become a Blaze Unlimited subscriber, you go to blazeunlimited.com/Daniel and you use promo code Frontier40. You can actually get a $40 off voucher for our Frontier magazine. It's our new magazine. We started last year quarterly. We're up to issue 5. But if you subscribe with Frontier 40, get $40 off. We'll actually give you back the 4 issues digitally, but going forward, you'll get a hard copy. The thing about hard copies is you can't edit, you can't erase. It's not subject to algorithms. Certainly good to read, something physical again. Beautiful illustrations, great articles on the culture, on red states, Frontier magazine. Subscribe today at blazeunlimited.com/Daniel. Promo code Frontier40 for $40 off. So, folks, I want to reiterate what I said before, that you look at New York City and everyone's focusing on the Islamist mayor and the fact that demographically, I mean, there's mosques on every corner of New York City, every one of those boroughs. You're not getting that back. I mean, that's more than stage 5. You're not getting that back. But the question is, what are we going to do in the places like Texas, like Florida, Alabama, Oklahoma, where they've already gotten their foothold, albeit the people as a whole still broadly don't want this. We had Prop 10 in Texas over the last week in this primary where 95% of Texas Republicans voted to affirm that they do not want Sharia in Texas. We have the governor in Texas who did officially declare CAIR a terrorist organization. So sentimentally, we're headed in the right direction. The problem is if you don't follow through, it's actually worse because then people fall into a lull, a sense of security, false sense of security that it's taken care of when in fact, well, okay, if CAIR and the Muslim Brotherhood are banned, well, how do we have all these mosques and schools continuing to operate, much less the new ones that are being built? And they are being built. Here's the thing. As you well know, the same pipeline, the money spigot that bin Laden had, that the terrorists have to operate, the American, I don't want to call them American, but the Islamic infrastructure operating on our soil has access to that same pipeline. That pipeline should be illegal, coming from terrorism, but still, it is funding it not just in New York City. New York City is not even worth talking about, unfortunately, sadly. A generation after 9/11, it's in red states. And it's funny, everyone asks me why I don't move to a red state yet. And I say, well, I'm waiting for a red state to be birthed, and then I'll move there. But I moved to a place like Texas. What am I going to get? Well, the same thing you get in Maryland. Wind, solar, data centers, carbon capture. Oh, and a mosque, not just in places like DFW, Houston, the big urban areas. All right, I'll move out to the country. No, I mean, they're in the Texas Panhandle. They're everywhere. So with us to discuss this and so much more is our good friend, Krista Schild. She is the Texas director of the RAIR Foundation, very heavily involved in Texas politics, just came off of her testimony before the House Judiciary Committee in Washington on this issue, and she's with us today. Krista, welcome back to The Blaze, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me back, Daniel.
Okay, I first just got to get your take. You are a flight attendant for American Airlines on 9/11.
Yes.
What is your take watching that video of the Southwest flight diverted because of a bomb threat, and then just some of the other adjacent stories we've seen over the weekend in New York City?
Well, obviously, there are more federal air marshals since 9/11 on flights. Thankfully, it looked like the man who confronted the man in that situation was most likely a FAM, we call them. And we do have procedures in place, especially since 9/11, to deal with those situations, to kind of lock certain situations down. But remember, right after 9/11, we had the shoe bomber on an American Airlines flight out of Paris Charles de Gaulle. And so even new procedure is created with every incident. But, of course, you have special training on dealing with bomb threats. But thankfully, it didn't get to that point of the situation. But we saw that Kansas City Airport was locked down for a time this weekend or yesterday because of a threat situation. This is the month of Ramadan. And I know our friend Robert Spencer with Jihad Watch does a calculation daily on the kills, the threats, the attacks that happen, and they only increase during the month of Ramadan, supposedly the month of peace under the religion of peace. And it's escalated, especially during this time that we're supposed to be having peace in the Middle East between our president and these nations. And I don't know if you're aware of Cat Stevens. Remember Cat Stevens, who goes by Yusuf Islam, the singer back in the day? Yeah, he's actually come out, and Robert Spencer just did a report on Jihad Watch saying that he's claiming that Middle East peace is falling apart, not because of the Islamic regime or anything that Islam is doing, but because of Western propaganda machine.
So that's a good launching place because I'm glad you mentioned that while we're having so many of these attacks. Obviously, the big one in Texas that should have been a catalyst for this discussion where 2 people were killed and others injured.
Mhm.
In that when Christians, what's the saying when a Christian or a Jew says God bless,
Right,
you're going to be in a situation of peace, of security,
right.
of love. Whereas when a Muslim says their version, Allah Akbar, you need to run as quickly as you can. And
Yeah,
like you said with Ramadan, I didn't even think about that. But again, around Christmas time, around Hanukkah, around Passover, Easter, whatever, again, you're not going to have issues. The other religions look inwards during their celebrations, during their times of introspection.
mhm,
Jews have a lot of fast days too, and I don't think they go around and shooting people. So Ramadan, they're supposed to fast, but I guess they still have a lot of energy to commit all these attacks. So the point is that is not like any other religion.
right.
Okay. So what I want to start with is, I mean, because this is so open ended, but when we talk about the
Mhm,
scope of the mosques in America, who
mhm,
they are, who's
right.
running them, including in red states, a
Mhm,
lot of people are talking about these 2 guys, Balat and whatever the other guy in New York City, that threw the IEDs and appears that like they had other explosives as well. So these guys are so they're homegrown. I mean, not initially homegrown. They were brought here, but they were born here. Their parents were brought here. They're saying it's ISIS inspired, but you know, correct me if I'm wrong. This is not a problem of some lunatic in Raqqa screaming something with a black flag.
mhm.
Describe how 18, 19-year-olds that were born here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
describe how they come to do something like that.
Well, it's because of the training that's happening within the mosque madras situation. For instance, right here in Texas, we have a mosque and a madras, an Islamic school, Sharia school, that the kids were chanting their allegiance to the former Ayatollah Khamenei. And so we have Iranian proxy right here on our soil. The man who I think we've talked about before, uh, he's leading the Houston Quran Academy. So Ghazali actually had a video production company years ago, and he took videos of the top terrorists around the world and training videos on what they do best. And he's running Sharia schools here in Texas, in the Northeast, and in Canada, and won an award for his madrasas in Canada. What do you think these kids are learning on our taxpayer dime?
Wait, so again, Hamid Ghazali.
Yeah.
So this is a guy who supports terrorism,
Mhm.
and yet he's sort of like the Khan Academy of Islam. I mean, he
Yeah.
runs the North American curriculum, right?
Yeah. Same with his family friend Magda, who's running these schools in Tampa, Florida.
What do you mean by running these schools? So you're saying these are like private Muslim schools.
Yes, they're private Muslim schools that are receiving our taxpayer funds. They have increased tuitions of their schools to try to receive the maximum benefit from our school voucher situation, from school choice as well, um, so that they can teach their kids not only the Quran and Arabic, but show them how to be the best jihadis with these training videos.
So I know there is a lawsuit in Houston now, the federal lawsuit. One of the Muslim lawyers is suing to get funding. So is there somewhat of an enforcement to clamp down now that the governor said that CARE is a terrorist group? So shouldn't the number of Islamic schools in Texas getting taxpayer funding essentially be zero?
Yes, absolutely.
Is
But
that
then
the
you have to
case?
deal with yes, but then we're dealing with the lawfare as a result. The lawyers and the endless amounts of money to sue us for not giving them what they feel entitled to.
So obviously, we're going to want a law here. Texas doesn't meet for almost another year. Next January, they're at a session. The governor signs this order, but there's lax enforcement. Then you're going to have the lawfare. We need something codified to make sure they don't get funding. Describe first the list of bills or ideas that we need to address both the mosque development and the new voucher program going to their terrorist schools. What sort of efforts we need, and then the political dynamic around it. Are we succeeding in pushing? I know Brian Harrison was calling for a special session. Where does it stand?
Yes. So at this point, I've been asking people to call the governor's office and back up Brian Harrison and request a special session to deal with property taxes finally and to deal with this situation with Sharia. We already had the governor and our attorney general say that CARE and Muslim Brotherhood, rightly so, are foreign terrorist and transnational criminal organizations. Yet, unless we codify that into Texas law, our law enforcement don't have the real go ahead to start dealing with that situation. And I've had law enforcement officers, county law enforcement officers, say to me, we understand the threat in our counties and we'd like to deal with it, but we need that law in place. When Governor Abbott's office has been called recently, they say this is an election season. This is not legislative season. We're not diverting time and funds to deal with a special session. And yet, that's not what we hear publicly necessarily. What we hear from the governor is that there is no Sharia in Texas. We banned it. We've dealt with it. Let's wait till the next session and we'll take care of it. But business as usual is going on with these mosques and their developments at a rapid rate, where we're seeing thousands of acres that have been land banked crop up. One of them near me was supposed to be a solar farm, solar and wind farm, and now we're finding that over 2,000 acres is owned by Dubai. And by the way, we're going to include another Islamic development. We need this taken care of now, not in January of
You
27.
got to be kidding me. I was just dealing with that issue before. So Texas was gobbled up by wind, solar, carbon capture, data centers, and now mosques. So it's like, pick your choice of what a red state is. This is unbelievable. The multi-frontal assault on our land, our heritage, our culture, our neighborhoods, and communities. So describe for us, Krista. I already know if I'm going to move to Texas. Okay, we know DFW, we know Houston. There's a ton of mosques, Austin. But okay, I'll move out into the more rural parts of Texas, and then okay, I'll be safe from this. Describe what's going on really throughout the state of Texas in terms of the development of these Islamic centers.
So we thought that too over 5 years ago and moved out to the country. So we're still within the Dallas-Fort Worth region, but this is rural. And on one side of me, 25 minutes away to the west, is the proposed epic city now being called the Meadow, that is 400, not just 402 acres, but they've purchased up to about 1,500 acres surrounding to develop that out as the Mecca of the West. Then to the east side of me is this new Dubai project that's come up and is under contention with the people of Terrell, Texas and Kaufman County, saying, we thought this was one thing. Now here we go again with another land banking Islamic development. I have people calling me from all over the state. I've driven all over the state doing presentations, and I hear this time and time again. There's another 400-acre piece of property out in the ETJ because they're buying out in the country it's called the extraterritorial jurisdictions in the county rather than the city, because there aren't as many rules surrounding that. And they're getting away with not only, pushing these things through because there aren't a lot of boundaries surrounding buying those pieces of property and developing them, but some of them have even had the nerve to force the city councils to annex them so that they can also run candidates and vote in city elections and take over.
So I remember last decade writing about the refugee issue. And this is in particular, we had the Afghans, but really others in Amarillo, Texas. Again, very far away from the center of gravity of the metro areas in Central Texas. And they really got an inordinate amount of refugees per capita. Describe what's going on in the Texas Panhandle.
So Amarillo, Lubbock area used to be 90% Christian. The current statistic that I found online is 67%. That has been driven by Obama's sanctuary cities, where he put North African refugees, Muslim refugees, they're Afghani refugees that were deliberately moved into those places to turn them. And since then, I remember years ago when Obama was in office and this started, that Amarillo area was a really peaceful place to live. Crime was really low, and crime spiked after that. We now have a mosque in Lubbock. They have a central mosque that taught their their families how to avoid criminal investigations and child protective services. That was that was a course that was taught last October in that mosque. Then they have an MSA, Muslim Student Association mosque, student mosque, and that one, there's actually a young man out of there from um, who basically started a new mosque, kind of community center rolled into one called the Unity Center. And it only took him 45 days to raise the funds, a lot of foreign funding, to buy an elementary school and convert it into a mosque per space community center. And he was found in Syria. We have pictures, video of him from Syria, back when the State Department said it's unsafe to be here, Americans don't come. So how is it that he could safely travel throughout Syria at a really violent time unless he's very well connected? And we find that he's very well funded, obviously.
So that's an interesting thing because any other religion, everyone knows that, private schools and churches, they're always scrapped for cash. It's always a big problem. And the fact that they have it so quickly, again, shows there's clearly a foreign element, which right off the bat, constitutionally, there is no right to bring in foreign terrorist money. And that's really how you cut off this problem at the head. Their entire infrastructure is built upon foreign terror funding. So we talk about it. We've talked about it since the Holy Land Foundation trial. But isn't it true, Krista, that if you look at the Holy Land Foundation and the players connected to it, that 20 years later or so, those players are still around at the nexus of the mosques and the educational curriculum?
Yes, actually, one of the Holy Land Foundation 5 was released from prison just a little over a year ago. And so we see Dallas-Fort Worth area is still being the epicenter for funding of terrorism around the world. We were talking about Hamid Ghazali with the Sharia schools, and he raised $12 million for what was right before HLF, was it OIF? And he raised the $12 million to basically help fund terrorism. He was a part of operationalizing the 9/11 attacks and raised the funds for Al Qaeda.
So he raised funds for Al Qaeda, and now he's out of prison, and he's going to be with all his buddies like Niyad Awad, doing this stuff, and it's just unbelievable that we have 172% growth in the Texas Muslim population really since 9/11, over 330 mosques, and there's a lot of mega ones that they're building now, and my concern is that the governor's designation is almost worse than doing nothing, because now it's giving this impression that we rectified the issue when in fact we haven't. Krista, could you tell our listeners, because a lot of people are very confused about this, HB 4211 that was supposed to deal with the epic mosques, could you explain exactly why it didn't deal with it and what we need to get past in the special session, and why we need a special session to make sure we don't have this?
Yeah, actually, I call HB 4211 very dangerously deceptive because it was touted out of the gate as being an anti-Sharia bill and says nothing about anti-Sharia. It's actually a fair housing bill that excluded Epic City. Can you imagine?
How did it exclude Epic City?
No, in the wording, it excludes Epic City from being retroactive to deal with that situation, yet that was the situation that was the catalyst for writing it. Imagine that.
So two things. Number one, it was only, henceforth, so it wouldn't deal with anything that got a permit already. And number two, you're saying it was a fair housing bill in the sense of, okay, you just can't discriminate against non-Muslims in the area. Well, yeah, I mean, once you colonize it, no non-Muslim is going to live there. The question is how to not colonize. So what sort of legislation are you looking for to deal with this at the source level?
So we're looking for legislation that essentially helps us stop the Islamization of Texas, of the spread of this, by initially saying that all of these over 600 Muslim organizations that are tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, they should have their doors shut, first of all. If they are designated as foreign terrorist criminal cartels, why are their doors still open? Why
Yeah.
is CARE still showing up at the State Board of Education meeting and demanding, not as a Muslim individual, this woman, but basically representing a Muslim Brotherhood Muslim organization at the State Board of Education to tell us what curriculum should look like in the state of Texas? Uh, enforcing Muslim Heritage Month on the state of Texas. And yet, since that designation, CARE marches forward with their plans for civilization jihad.
You're saying
So,
they operate openly in the Texas Capitol after being designated.
yes, and every form of government within the state, they're influential yet.
It reminds me of illegal immigration in many ways, where everyone's like, "Oh, they're in the shadows," and then the Democrats would just bring them to the State of the Union address in the Capitol, knowing they wouldn't get arrested. It's a joke, and it's got to be dealt with. And again, just politically, the Texas is on the chopping block in part because Republicans are terrible, in part because of the demographic problems we're talking about.
Yeah.
So if you want to make sure you don't fall to the Democrats statewide for the first time in a generation, the way to do it is galvanize people precisely by having the special session now so they have something to turn out for, as opposed to saying, oh, we'll deal with it later when everyone knows they won't. You talk about the Heritage Month. One of the things I wanted to go over with you is Ramadan in the public schools. So I never heard of Ramadan until, I was in college, until really after 9/11, I guess. I didn't know what it was. I wouldn't have known what it was. It wasn't a thing. And then now, suddenly, again, it's all over the schools. Describe what you've seen this month in Texas public schools.
So we've seen displays crop up that for celebrating the month of Ramadan, this is Sharia creep. This is, well, if you celebrate any of your American holidays or Christian holidays, Jewish holidays, then we want our space as well. But with that space, it's, I think, more specialized. Actually, Christian holidays have been more curtailed in order to not offend people, and yet they don't care how much these Islamic holidays and how much this, Islamic push offends us. For instance, I don't know if you saw Wiley East High School and what happened there several weeks ago. So a young man who runs the Republican Club and the Turning Point USA group at his high school right here in Collin County, basically he reported that we have a table set up from ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America. ICNA is a Muslim Brotherhood organization, and their foreign counterpart is Jamaat-e-Islami. Jamaat-e-Islami is the same group that owned Osama bin Laden's compound when we captured and killed him. And they're bringing a table into the schools that says, "Why Islam?" ? I'm sure you've seen the billboard somewhere. and they're handing out hijabs to all the girls in school. They're handing out Qurans. They're handing out doctrine and pamphlets on Sharia and pushing this in the school with the principal giving the go-ahead for them to come in during lunchtime. And parents are and even students are throwing up their hands and they're saying, we've had enough of this. We understand what Islam is. We understand what Sharia is. 95% of Texans said we don't want this. And yet the push still continues, and we're having to fight back every single day. And all of these things that are cropping up and trying to take over our spaces. It's not enough for Muslims and Islam to have their own space. The Sharia creep has been even since 2012 with former Governor Rick Perry, that signed halal into state law. And so we're still dealing with this. We don't want halal butchery, and yet we have halal meat in almost all of our public schools in Texas.
And again, the next time anyone says, well, Daniel, I don't like it, but then they'll say the same thing about this religion or that religion, or what are we going to do, with the school funding? If you're going to go to Catholic schools, that has to go to them. If you're going to celebrate, Christian holidays, you have to celebrate this. Wait a minute. There's one big difference that we're not discussing. Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Mormon, Amish, whatever it is, they're not funded and espousing and connected to the terrorists that we've been at war with. Right.
That's right.
This is the big difference.
Yes.
That it's not just incidentally Ramadan is creeping up and this stuff is creeping up into the schools. It's that it's being put there by terrorist organizations. But then again, perhaps that's not so incidental. The fact that it's exclusively coming by terrorists maybe ought to tell you something about Islam, because Krista, here's where I want to land the plane here for the day. We've discussed, we've had this debate about, we're saying that at the infrastructure level, every single Islamic infrastructure is essentially hooked in through the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist network. They want to say, obviously, no, it's not true. Okay. So could you tell me, Krista, have you seen in Texas, are there Muslim organizations, NGOs, mosques that are having events praying for our soldiers, events that are pushing back against CARE, saying, look, you know what? We can't paint everyone with a broad brush. We're good. CARE, we're not like CARE. Is anyone coming out doing that to at least exemplify their point?
No, not at all.
You're sure? You haven't seen it?
I haven't seen any of that. No. No. As a matter of fact, all I see are pro-Palestinian Hamas marches in our streets. I see them show up at soccer games. They love soccer. Frisco is an epicenter of soccer. World FIFA Cup is coming in June. And they're already setting up their huge Dawa campaigns for that.
Yep. I mean, here's the thing. Let me give an analogy to subverting when someone subverts your own religion. So obviously Christians are up in arms about Tellerico, this Democrat Senate nominee in Texas, for espousing Christianity and this toxic empathy, as my colleague Allie Beth Stuckey calls it, for left-wing, communist policies funneled through Christianity. If you're a Christian, man, does that get you pissed off. As someone who's Jewish, when I hear liberal Jews promote their communism and try to enmesh it in the Old Testament, and boy, do I get pissed off, because I hate them more than anyone else because it's subversive. So if you're a Muslim and they're espousing things that aren't just subversive, but murder and mayhem and killing, and that is really not what you believe in, you should be screaming from the rooftops and be out there. And that's what really always bothered me. Because I think, like, you and I are not bothered by other theologies. There's a lot of theologies we might find weird and foreign, but they're not out there, okay, we have this debate in America over H-1Bs and whatever, but I'm not worried that Hindus are going to come and kill me.
No.
No. I don't think you're worried about your security there in Texas from anyone but one ideology.
Yes. Yeah, well, they have a 1,400-year history of murder, rape, raids, stealing, slavery, you name it. And they're an ideology of hatred and a culture of war and bloodshed. They're the only religion that is defined as that. And if they were to show up in America today for the first time and try to establish as a religion with their history, do you think they'd even be able to do that?
So
they have
that's my
501c3.
point. That's my point, because it let's say January 6th, I don't know, was anyone able to assert in court, the Oath Keepers or whatever, the what's that organization that the left was obsessed with, whatever, and it wasn't the Oath Keepers, the other one.
Yeah.
If they're able to call themselves a religion, say, well, look, I have First Amendment, freedom of religion, right? You're never able to do that with an ideology. And somehow this is an exception, and it's not deeply rooted in our history and tradition. It is new. We're trying to enshrine it. And this is the big issue. So, Krista, my final thing is, you would think that the more right-wing and conservative you get, the more that this issue should really be at the forefront of your mind, that we're not going to have a civilization in any state, forget about nationally, but even in Texas, Oklahoma, places like that, if we don't get Sharia out of America. Yet you have some of the top voices with audiences much bigger than mine throughout the right, Tucker on down, all these people, that they're doing the opposite. Their entire focus, I mean, they're not focused on AI, data centers, land grabs, property taxes. Their one thing is to sanitize Islam and say that everything that we're saying in this conversation about Islam is really the Jews are really doing it, and that needs to be our focus. What are you seeing on the ground, and what do we do with this? Because, my concern is that it's really going to misdirect an entire generation of people on the right to just give into Muslim Brotherhood propaganda.
Yeah. No, my response when I get questions like that is, I will not run the same narrative as Hamas. And that's essentially what you're doing when you want to shift the blame to somebody who's not the blame. The other thing I say as a Christian is, where there's covenant, there's also counterfeit. And if you're not differentiating between the two, you're sowing seeds into the next Holocaust. And I refuse to do that. I tell people, especially if they're Christian, I say, go back and read your Bible, and what does it actually say? I say, are there people in your government that don't represent you and that your name doesn't want to be tied to?
No, I mean, and that's the problem now, because this is part of a subversion campaign. Some of it's also Russian propaganda. Chinese are getting involved a little bit, but literally, this was what we saw post 9/11 with the left and establishment Republicans. But to have on the so-called hard right now promoting the same Muslim Brotherhood propaganda is just unbelievable, because we're not going to be able to deal with this if we're going to have the top voices on the right sanitizing it and saying, well, actually, Sharia is not such a problem, and here's where the problem is. It's all, Israel somehow doing it. So this is definitely dangerous. Obviously, you guys have a stellar website that's prolific, covering all these stories. RAIR Foundation, check it out. Where are you on Twitter?
On X, we have Amy Mek, M-E-K, M-E-A-M-Y, M-E-K, on X, and I'm also at XPISTAS on X. And so you can find our daily posts. You can go to RAIR, R-A-I-R, foundation.com, and you can look at Amy Mek's Substack. Please put your email address in there so that we can send you action alerts, and you're getting daily articles and these videos that back up what we're saying. Those videos are worth a million words.
No, they really are. I mean, and that's the thing, because this is so foreign to a lot of people. I don't know the names, the terms, and this is really what you guys break down, what to look for. And if any of you in the audience want to start a chapter and work with Amy and Krista in your state, email me, Daniel Horowitz at startmail.com, and we'll connect you, because that's so important. You guys could train people on what to look for in their communities, in their neighborhoods. I think all of us kind of throw up our hands. We reflexively think like, we're not happy. We shouldn't have let them in, but what do we do? You know, we could start a church so they could start a mosque, but no. What is funding that mosque? That is not lawful. That is not okay. You want to start Islam religion without terror funding? Go ahead and do it. But that's not what they have right here. And that's what you guys are getting to. Again, rarefoundation.com.
Yes, .com.
Krista, thanks so much. Tell Amy she has a standing invitation. We got to get her on as well. Thanks so much for your work.
You have a blessed day. Thank you.
So, folks, again, that was Krista Schild. She just recently gave testimony to the House Judiciary Committee. Chip Roy held a committee hearing on this. And now, by the way, Chip has to struggle. Chip is trying to become Attorney General of Texas to deal with this. But there's a lot of money in there for this guy that came out of nowhere with tens of millions of dollars. Because they don't want a guy to actually deal with it. I'll talk about that more later in the week. Make sure to like and subscribe us, Horowitz Show on YouTube, as well as our Substack, Liberating Truths. We had another newsletter go out today, which was, so you want to make sure you see that as well. Hope you guys have a blessed day. Till tomorrow. Thank you for listening. Micah 6-8.